All right, Dragon Brood, there's a lot to say about Bloomburrow. I mean, we had our streamer event, and many of y'all have now been to pre-release. And this is the point where we start getting knee-deep in deck building, trying to decide what we want to put together, and in some cases, what you need to be spending money on or trading for at your local game store, or just what you need to craft on MTG Arena. MTV is a whole other thing. But this is where we're going to have a serious conversation. We have a lot of information here, and we're going to talk about the 10 cards that overperformed over the last few days from Bloomburrow. Also, quick note, I actually have another video of also cards that underperformed, and it should be live the same time this one is, so you can check that one out after you're done with this one. Okay, the first one I want to talk about is Paw Patch Recruit. This one's a little bit unassuming, and this is kind of just a bonus card. It wasn't going to be one of my original 10, but then I started thinking about it. Every time I saw it, whether I played it or an opponent played it, it actually created a lot of interesting board states, to the point that the person who doesn't control the card has to make some serious decisions on what to target, when to even target them, because you can't even get too tricky during combat because then counters appear on other things, right? So this is a very interesting card, and the fact that it has Offspring is also really powerful. So yeah, this is one I wouldn't go nuts on, but if you're doing some type of, well, of course rabbits, but some type of green-based aggro, like this is one to consider if you have it in your collection. Dragonhawk Fate's Tempest. This is one that actually did live up to the hype. I wasn't totally sure about this card. I knew it was going to be playable, but the question was how playable. Turns out it fits a few different deck types and actually did exactly what you wanted it to do. The fun thing about it is that extra damage really does matter. Even if you don't get to attack with it or whatever, sometimes you're just dealing 4 damage and that's enough. Now, I did do a video where I compared this to Bonehorde Dracosaur. I do think they both still have their place, but this is actually a pretty good option. So if you open up one of these, I would go ahead and play a few games with it and try it out to see what you think. But so far, this one has delivered. If it overperformed only by a little bit, because I think we expected it to be good, but I thought it still should be mentioned here because it's a card a lot of people had interest in. All right, next up is Thoughtstalker Warlock. Now, this card, just being a 2/2 for 3, but it does have Menace, and forcing your opponent to discard a card is super nice. And when you get to select the card, it's even better. Like, this actually ended up fitting a few different builds. I saw it in several mono black discard things. I saw it obviously in some lizard builds. Like, this is just kind of a card that can be a nuisance, but it does what it's supposed to do, and it's pretty easy to buy because it's just an uncommon. You'll be surprised if you pay more than a quarter to 50 cents for this. But also, on Arena, it's just an uncommon, so it's pretty easy to craft if you're looking for something to fill a slot. And while we're on that topic, just discard stuff. So we're talking about Bandit's talent here. Like, making your opponent discard a card, great. Getting to deal damage to them, great. Getting an extra card, even greater. So it does do some really good things. I saw this mostly in the discard decks, of course, but could it potentially live somewhere else? Like, maybe. Just being a nuisance and potentially just getting you some extra value is actually not bad, but obviously only really shines in the discard decks. Now, the question becomes, do the discard decks really make a long-term impact? I don't know, but the discard decks have been good for a while now, and I think they're still at least going to have a place, at least on the ladder. I don't know how it's going to be in competitive play, but I will expect you'll see a few of these if you're trying to do any ranking. So just keep in mind, this card's out there, and it is actually pretty good. All right, Scrap Shooter. This is one that I feel like I had so much to say about in the, I guess we'll call it the preseason, the preview season. And this actually performed fantastically. Honestly, there were multiple games where this just being a 4/4 with reach was good enough, right? It's good against the bats, good against random 1-drops from, or even 2-drops in some cases, from the mono red decks. Like, this just does a lot of little incidental work. And then being able to get rid of an artifact or an enchantment is just a really nice bonus. And truthfully, it came in handy a bunch. And I wasn't sure how much giving your opponent a card was going to hurt, but the trade-off is that if it's a thing you need to get rid of, you kind of don't care that you gave them an extra card. And not to mention, this was probably one of like 4 playable raccoons that makes this stand out a bit. But even in the Gruul aggro deck, and I think we just put that deck up yesterday maybe, so you can check out that video, like, this card performed very well, so you can check that out if you want to see it in action. I also think this card's going to be one of the new pieces that makes its home, if you want to call it that, in mono green decks. Because, I mean, a 3-mana 4/4 is fantastic. And the fact that it's only 2 green and 1 colorless makes it to where you can play a few other lands and not have to worry about if you're going to be able to cast this on time. So yeah, Scrap Shooter, overall, overperformed, really good, and honestly, I'm glad I was right on this one. Actually, y'all, if I could take a quick second here and make a request of you, if you do like these types of videos, could you let me know down in the comments or any suggestions for other types of videos like this? Because I don't think we have creators making a lot of these because people don't tend to respond well to them or even just watch them. And they do still take some time to script, research, edit, all that good stuff. So that would help a lot. And then if you just like these types of videos or you like me and the channel, be sure to check out everything else. And don't forget to hit the like button and the subscribe button because that helps a lot too. But let's get to the rest of those cards. Now, this is the second of 3 talent cards that have made our list, and for good reason. Like, if you were willing to play a sorcery speed bite spell of any kind, you might as well play this. And it's honestly kind of low investment in your decks. I mean, one, it's only 1 green in the cost, right? So it's 2 total mana, gives you ability to take out an opposing creature, and it gives you extra value down the road by giving you trample for some things that may have trouble punching through, or also giving you the ability to draw a card if you don't want to necessarily overcommit to the battlefield. So lots of things you could do with your mana here. The card is very low cost. I think, again, it's an uncommon. I don't think you're going to spend more than 50 cents to try to get your hands on. And this is just an uncommon wild card in Arena. I think if you're playing mono green, if you're playing Gruul aggro, I would even say probably some Golgari builds can probably play this. Like, it's going to find a home in a lot of places. Like, just being a removal card on top of adding extra value means it's practically never going to be a dead card. Like, worst case scenario, even if you're playing against control, you just go ahead and level up to 2 and then level up to 3, so you're at least getting some attack bonuses and getting to draw cards, right? So yeah, this is a great card. Just having things in your deck that aren't going to go to waste. Like, this card provided so much value in multiple games that I saw. Like, love it. Oh man, Iridescent Vine Lasher. Where do we start with this card? Uh, I really don't even know. Like, it's just a quality card to begin with. 1 mana, 1/2. And various decks were playing this as their turn 1 play just to get incidental damage, especially if you're playing Lizards, because they obviously want you to deal a damage every turn. Easy way to get there. The graveyard land manipulation decks, they were playing this, just putting a bunch of land into play, getting, especially if you paid the offspring on this card, getting sometimes 12 triggers in a turn, so it fits there. Like, there's probably even some versions of just Rakdos aggro that want this for just incidental damage. Like, there's a lot going on with this card, and I think it's one that lots of people overlooked initially, going like, well, yeah, sure, how much landfall stuff is there? But don't forget, we are back to playing stuff like Fable Passage even, or if you really want to, we have multiple other lands that actually go search and put lands into play. We still have Demolition Fields, right? Those are a thing. So there's a lot of incidental cards you can play that already helps your deck out, that this is going to get extra value from. And again, the offspring just piles that damage on even more. Like, this is really good, especially in situations where you might get a convoluted board state where you can't really attack through. This can still let you get finishing damage. Saw it multiple times during the streamer event. So yeah, this is a card that if you're thinking about playing it and it fits your deck, it's probably worth it. And it doesn't go for very much right now if you want to get your hands on them. It almost didn't make my list because I feel like it performed as we expected it to. However, within the context of the Bat deck, it actually overperformed a little bit. It was kind of the difference in games, and honestly, it added a lot of fun tension. There were multiple games where somebody was close to dying and they had to find a couple of ways to gain some life in case they hit a damage card off the top with the augur, but then now that they had the card from the augur, they were able to do something and try to gain the advantage back. Like, that's the kind of card you want, right? With fun interplay, there's some risk to it. Obviously, it has offspring, so if you want to gamble to draw multiple cards, that's fine. Some of the decks were gaining enough life that they just didn't care. Like, this card turned out to be very good, and being 2/3 was very important in multiple situations. So yeah, now, how long will the bats be good in the long term? That remains to be seen, but this card doesn't just have to be played in the bats deck, right? This is just generally good. If you're playing something with lots of food and you're gaining life, say in a Golgari build, or maybe some other alternate Orzhov build, you don't really have to worry about your life all that much and just take the extra card value. Like, this is a really solid card all the way around. And again, another one that's pretty cheap to get your hands on, but yeah, not once did I see anybody really upset they drew this card, except for maybe if they were at like 2 or 3 life. But yeah, this card's really good and totally worth playing. If you're building bats and you don't have this in your deck, there's a good chance you're building it wrong. Alright, I believe this is the last of the talent cards that made my list, and this is Storm Chaser's talent. It's just 1 blue mana, which is really good, especially if you're playing the Otters deck or a Prowess deck that just needs you to play non-creature spells. But this also makes you an additional creature that happens to have Prowess. So this fits perfectly within that realm, obviously. And then you just get incremental value over the top, getting to return spells, right? Getting another Otter. Like, I almost never saw it get to level 3, though. You're usually at level 1 and then playing other spells. But I did see a couple of times late game where just returning that extra card was enough to get finishing damage. And that's kind of all it has to do. Now, I think the issue becomes, is this going into decks that want particularly Otters, or just decks that want non-creature spells, or decks that just want to do the prowess thing? If I were guessing, I would say there's probably going to be some version of the prowess deck that just wants you to play non-creature spells of some kind, and this is going to fit that very well. I don't know if the Otters overall are the thing to kind of hold their own weight in that space. I think Izzet Spells still has a lot of room, but this could be one of those cards that fits that type of deck. Just being 1 blue mana and giving you the value of triggering your prowess stuff and making you a blocker is actually super good and kind of hard to ignore if you're doing any type of deck building right now in that space. So, an easy card to pick up, cheap to craft, totally worth experimenting with if you hadn't considered it. And actually, before I get off this, I kind of want to point out too that the times I saw Otters do really well was when they got this card, especially in multiples, early. Not sure if that means anything, could just be coincidental. It's a very small sample size, but at least wanted to include that bit of information. Gev, Scaled Scorch. This is an interesting one because, first off, how good this card continues to be will largely be how good lizards are, right? But it is possible that Gev could live in some world where you have other things doing consistent damage, and then the creature still come into play with the +1/+1 counter on it, and maybe only have a couple of other lizards in the deck. Probably something like Vine Lasher, right? That's a possibility. However, within the context of lizards, this card is fantastic. Like the type of card that multiple times I caught myself just holding up removal early on if I obviously could tell my opponent was playing lizards that, hey, we need to get rid of Gev, right? It's just an automatic damage trigger every time, which sets all their stuff off. And making the creatures bigger just makes them harder and harder to deal with. And then, not to mention, lizards as a whole have a pile of stuff that make them deal more damage. When you deal damage with a thing, this thing happens. You know, just tons of stuff. So, yeah, Gev, super good. Now, again, I don't know how popular lizards will continue to be, but this is super cheap if you do want to build lizards. Like the fact that their best card happens to be a budget card, and I haven't seen these for more than $1 anywhere, I don't think, if you want to build this in paper. So it could be one worth going after right now, even if it's just popular in the short term without having to make a serious investment. But the card overall is a 3/2 for 2 with upside, so it gets to deal damage if they target it to kill it. And every card after that is just spectacular. So yeah, nothing to complain about on Gev. Again, we thought this was going to be good, but it even overperformed what our expectations were. Oh man, Vine Reap Mentor. Now this one almost didn't make my list, but I had to take a step back on this and kind of hear me out and follow my logic here for a second. I think the squirrels did not perform as well as we thought they would. And I'm going to talk about that again in the underperformers video, so don't forget to check that out after this video. But when I looked back at it, the times this was played in some greater capacity, whether it was like Golgari midrange, or something that cared about artifacts coming into play, or something that cared about food, this card was really good, y'all. Like, I mean, don't get me wrong, it's kind of obvious that it's a 3/2 for 2, but then it makes a food when it enters and when it dies. So you're effectively getting 3 permanents for 2 mana, right? Even if you just play it, chump block something, say against mono red, right? You play it, you get a food. You block something, you get a food. So now you have things that help you survive the rest of that matchup while possibly having picked off one of their creatures as well. Like, there's a lot of value to be had here in this little body. But again, I don't know if it's within the context of squirrels. And I think that's part of the conversation I'm struggling with just a little bit. Because on the one hand, I could argue that it underperformed, but did it underperform because of what it is or because of squirrels as a whole? And I think it was the concept of squirrels that underperformed, while this was consistently one of the better cards in the deck. And then again, when I saw it in decks that weren't squirrels, it was a really good card. So yeah, this is another one. I think if you're considering filling a spot, or you're short on something, or even right now, if you don't have quite the number of rares or mythics you need, at least give this card a look. If nothing else, you're getting solid value for 2 mana. I wouldn't complain about having this in the deck, and definitely not going to laugh at it if I see it across the table. Okay, with all that being said, I don't want this to be looked at as like the exhaustive list of all the cards that overperformed. I think there's a whole pile of cards that were pretty good, but I think for the most part, things met our expectations, which is actually a good thing. That, as a community, we valued some cards and the values were fairly accurate, or as bad as we thought, in either direction, right? So that's a good thing. But there were also a lot of other cards that weren't in Bloomburrow that ended up being a little better. And maybe, I don't know, are y'all interested? Let me know in the comments. We'll make a video about that too. Non-Bloomburrow cards, maybe cards that got a boost because of Bloomburrow, right? That's a thing people might want to know. But yeah, there's just a whole lot of stuff. I think it's amazing in like a 1 week window what we can learn about a set. But like I was saying, if you want to know more about Bloomburrow, check out the cards that underperform, because you might learn something from that too. So go have fun with that. That's all of you for now. We'll see you next time.